Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again taking, complex source material, legal stuff, technical reports, political interviews, and really boiling it down to what you need to know.
And today we're tackling something that's, well, it's a constant friction point in our digital world. It's that moment when governments get their hands on really powerful surveillance tools.
Yeah, tools, they say, are for security, right?
Right.
But immediately there's that fear, that real concern about privacy, about democratic checks and balances just eroding away.
Exactly. And we've got a case study today where that fear became, well, a massive political flashpoint. We're looking at Uruguay and a system called El Guardian.
The Guardian. It sounds protective, but the story here is pretty intense. It's about this huge communications interception system, how it was implemented, and the, frankly, crisis of control that followed.
Yeah, the sources we have are fascinating. On one hand, you've got these quite explosive political interviews and legal analyses from Uruguay detailing just how bad the oversight situation got with El Guardian.
And we're putting that right alongside the sort of colder reality of the global picture. We have a transparency report from Telefonica, a huge telecom operator.
Right, and that report shows how they handle government surveillance requests, literally hundreds of thousands of them from countries all over. Think Germany, Spain, Brazil, and, yeah, Uruguay too.
So our mission today, we want you to quickly get a handle on not just what El Guardian is, technically speaking, but the really tricky balance involved.
That balance between, state security needs,
Yeah.
the essential role of judges providing oversight, and fundamental rights like privacy.
And critically, how that balance is supposed to work and how, in this case, it seems to have been, well, seriously mismanaged. We're digging into where things went wrong. Was it the tech or something more human?
Mm.
Okay, let's start by unpacking the system, El Guardian. What exactly are we talking about here?
So it's a pretty advanced piece of software specifically designed for intercepting communications. The Uruguayan government, specifically the Ministry of the Interior, or MI, they acquired it way back in 2013.
2013. That seems quite early for this level of tech deployment.
It does, but interestingly, it didn't actually become fully operational until maybe late 2016 or sometime in 2017. There was a significant lag.
Okay, so a few years to get it up and running. That probably speaks to the complexity of actually integrating something like this.
Absolutely. Setting up a digital surveillance apparatus of this scale isn't trivial. But the capabilities, once it was running, that's where things get really eye-opening.
Right, because we're not just talking about old-school wiretaps anymore, are we? What could El Guardian actually do?
The scope is, well, it's vast. First, the scale of simultaneous monitoring. It could follow up to 800 cell phones and 200 landlines, all at the same time.
800 cell phones. In a country the size of Uruguay, that feels like a significant chunk of potential surveillance capacity.
It is. But the really potent aspect is how it integrated digital communications. It wasn't just calls.
So emails, social media, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Emails, monitoring social media, even blogs. And the sources highlight a specific, quite invasive capability, creating what they called mirror accounts.
Mirror accounts. That sounds, it sounds bad. What does that mean in practice?
It means the system could essentially create a real-time duplicate of someone's email inbox. Up to 100 mirror accounts for email subscriptions, the reports mention.
So instead of requesting old emails, they could just watch them arrive in real time.
Precisely. It bypasses the need for warrants for stored communications in some ways. It's about capturing the flow as it happens. It grants almost total visibility into that aspect of someone's digital life.
Wow, okay. So emails, social media, calls, a comprehensive tool. And was it used much?
The numbers suggest heavily used, yes. Since it became functional, the sources state over 10,000 specific interventions were carried out using El Guardian.
10,000. That volume alone raises huge questions about oversight and justification.
It really does. It signals a massive state capability to dip into private communications. And that leads directly to the issue of transparency, or rather, the lack of it.
Because this system, its very existence and how it worked, was kept secret from the start, wasn't it?
Deliberately so.
Yeah.
The original presidential resolution authorizing the purchase back in 2013 explicitly ordered that the entire purchase operation be kept secret.
And when people tried to find out more, journalists, citizens?
The Ministry of the Interior fought them in court. They argued the information should be classified as secret or reserved.
And the courts actually agreed. What was the reasoning for keeping not just maybe operational details, but the whole thing under wraps?
The courts sided with the ministry, yeah. Their legal argument was basically a standard national security claim. Revealing the technical details, they argued, could compromise security.
How so?
The fear was that hackers, or maybe sophisticated criminal groups, could figure out how the system worked, find weaknesses, and then use that knowledge to evade investigations. So, ironically, secrecy was framed as necessary to protect citizens.
So the official line was, we need this secret tool to fight serious crime, organized crime, money laundering, terrorism.
Right, they invoked international agreements like the Palermo Convention, domestic anti-crime laws, basically saying these modern threats require modern, powerful tools. And the law does allow for surveillance under strict conditions.
The key condition being a judicial order, right? Interception without one is illegal.
Absolutely legal. Any evidence gathered that way is null and void, and the person doing it commits a crime. That's the legal theory.
But hold on, if the justification for secrecy was to stop criminals from hacking the system, how does that justify keeping the rules secret? The protocols, the oversight mechanisms, surely transparency there helps the judges, not the
No,
criminals.
that's exactly the question. And that's where this shifts from potentially necessary operational secrecy to something looking much more like deliberate administrative obfuscation.
Because the legal framework doesn't just allow surveillance, it demands strict control. And you can't have control without transparency on the rules.
Precisely. And as we're about to see, the failure here wasn't just about hiding the system. It was about actively failing to follow the very rules designed to ensure it was used legally.
Okay, so the system is powerful, secret, and justified, supposedly, by the need for legal controlled surveillance. But that promise of control just shattered.
It completely fell apart. This brings us to July 2019, and this bombshell dropped by Senator Javier Garcia.
What did he reveal?
His core accusation was devastating. He stated that for 3 years, essentially, since El Guardian went live, the mandatory agreed-upon control mechanisms were simply ignored, completely bypassed,
Ignored, meaning the oversight system wasn't just weak, it was inactive.
effectively neutralized.
Yeah?
And Garcia's conclusion from this was stark. Because the checks weren't done, you simply could not say for sure that El Guardian hadn't been used illegally. The whole system went dark from an accountability perspective.
Okay, we need to break this down. What were these controls that were ignored? How is it supposed to work?
The rules were laid out in a formal agreement, a memorandum of understanding between the key players, the Ministry of the Interior, MI, the Prosecutor General's Office, FGN, and crucially, the Supreme Court of Justice, SCJ.
The highest court, the ultimate judicial check.
Exactly. And 2 articles in that agreement, Article 11 and Article 12, were vital for oversight.
Let's take Article 11 first. What did that require?
Article 11 was about basic reporting. It mandated that the MI, through its tech unit called UNATech, had to send quarterly reports to the Supreme Court,
Quarterly reports detailing what?
detailing all the telephone interceptions carried out using the system. Every single one. This was supposed to start the moment El Guardian became operational.
Okay, straightforward enough. What actually happened?
0 reports were sent. None. At the time, Senator Garcia raised the alarm, depending on whether you count from late 2016 or 2017. Somewhere between 8 and 12 of these mandatory quarterly reports were overdue.
12 missing reports. So the Supreme Court had no official data from the ministry about who is being monitored or how often.
None whatsoever. The President of the Supreme Court confirmed it publicly. They received nothing. For years, the judicial branch, which is constitutionally tasked with protecting rights against state power, was flying completely blind.
That's stunning. It's not a technical failure, it's just paperwork not being filed.
Purely bureaucratic negligence, it seems. But the failure of Article 11 crippled the next, arguably even more critical control, Article 12.
Article 12, what was that supposed to do?
Article 12 required a cross-check, what the documents call a cotejo. Think of it like balancing the books.
Okay, how would that work?
Well, on one side, you have the judicial authorizations. A judge issues a formal signed order, let's say, authorizing 10 specific interceptions for a set period. That's the legal command.
Got it. The judge says, monitor these 10.
Right. On the other side, you have the operational reality. The telecom companies actually carry out the interceptions ordered by the MI using El Guardian. The cotejo required the Supreme Court to compare the judge's orders with the MI's operational records, showing what was actually done.
Ah, so they check. Did the ministry only intercept the 10 numbers the judge approved?
Exactly. If the judge approved 10 and the MI's records showed 10 interceptions happened, then everything checks out. Legally sound.
But if the judge approved 10 and the MI's records showed, say, 12 interceptions actually occurred.
Then you've got 2 interventions that happened outside the law. Illegal surveillance. Article 12 was designed specifically to catch that discrepancy. It was the core verification step.
But it couldn't happen.
It couldn't happen because the MI never sent the operational reports required by Article 11. Without those reports detailing what interceptions they actually carried out, the Supreme Court had nothing to compare the judicial orders against.
So the entire verification loop was broken just because the first step, filing the reports, was skipped.
Precisely. The oversight mechanism was completely severed by administrative inaction. The judiciary was paralyzed in its duty to ensure legality.
And the Supreme Court acknowledged this.
They did. The president of the SCJ basically said, look, we can't rule out illegal use. And the quote is chilling, something like, we cannot discard that it is being used illegally for the simple reason that the controls established to discard it were not carried out.
Wow. So the system, potentially designed to be auditable, was rendered completely opaque just by someone not doing their admin tasks.
It throws a harsh light on the limits of technical safeguards, doesn't it? The best audit trail in the world is useless if the human process is feeding it. Simply stop.
Now, politically, this exploded. Senator Garcia didn't just point to negligence, he seemed to point fingers, particularly at the Minister of the Interior at the time, Bonomi.
Yes, Garcia explicitly stated he had much more suspicion regarding Minister Bonomi. He framed it, quite pointedly, as stemming from the minister's alleged ideology.
What ideology?
Garcia claimed Bonomi prioritized the political above the judicial. Now, we need to be neutral here, but the implication of that accusation is serious.
It suggests it wasn't just accidental oversight, but potentially a deliberate sidelining of judicial control by the executive branch.
That's the accusation Garcia leveled. It taps into that fundamental tension. Is the judiciary a partner in security or an obstacle to be managed? Garcia clearly suspected the latter view was dominant.
A clash between a security-first mindset and a rights-based constitutional mindset.
Exactly. And the sources are quite clear on another point. This whole mess only came to light, and steps were only taken to fix it after it became public.
So internal controls didn't catch it. It required external pressure.
Absolutely. The MI finally met with the SCJ. They started drafting a new protocol. But none of that happened organically. It took what the sources call a public intervention, investigative journalism, parliamentary action like Garcia's, to force the issue. Transparency, forced from the outside, was the only catalyst for change.
Okay, so the oversight system failed spectacularly in practice. But let's look at how it was supposed to work, the intended due process. There was this protocol of actuation for legal interceptions.
Right, that protocol laid out the intended workflow.
Mm-hmm.
And it relied heavily on another piece of technology, a system called SAIL, the Systematized Legal Interception System.
SAIL. Is that part of El Guardian or something different?
It's different, and that distinction is actually really important. Think of it like this. SAIL is the secure digital system for handling the warrants. It manages the legal paperwork trail electronically.
Okay, so SAIL is the authorization system.
Exactly. El Guardian is the tool that executes the interception once the warrant is approved via SAIL. SAIL manages the legality. El Guardian does the actual listening or monitoring.
Got it. So how is the workflow through SAIL meant to ensure legality and control?
It was designed to be quite structured and secure. The process would typically start with the police. They'd submit a request for surveillance electronically through SAIL.
Then what?
That request goes to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor evaluates it, decides if it's justified, and sends a formal opinion supporting or rejecting it to the penal judge, also through SAIL.
And the judge makes the final call.
Yes, the judge is the key gatekeeper. They review everything, and if they agree, issue a formal resolution authorizing the surveillance. Critically, this resolution had to be authenticated with the judge's digital signature.
A digital signature adds a layer of security and non-repudiation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That signed, digital authorization is then securely transmitted, again via SAIL, directly to the telecom operator who needs to carry out the interception.
And the system was meant to be trackable.
That was the claim. The protocol boasted that SAIL was auditable. The judge could supposedly log in and monitor the status of their order, see if the operator had executed it.
So authorities were quite confident in this digital workflow.
Very confident publicly. They contrasted it with older manual systems, saying with SAIL, there is no possibility of anyone inventing any situation. It was meant to be foolproof.
The irony being
that while the warranting system, SAIL, might have been digitally secure and auditable, the complete failure to report on the results of those warrants, the data collected by El Guardian, blew a massive hole in the whole concept of auditability. The back end wasn't connected to the front end, administratively speaking.
The technical safeguard on the warrant side was completely undermined by the bureaucratic failure on the reporting side.
Precisely. And beyond that specific failure, civil society groups like an organization called DataSoc were raising deeper concerns. They argued the whole legal basis, the protocol itself, was flawed.
What was their main issue with the protocol?
Their core argument was that an internal agreement, a memorandum of understanding between agencies, just isn't strong enough for something as intrusive as mass surveillance. They insisted you need detailed, robust national laws passed by Parliament, publicly debated and accessible.
Because a law is harder for the executive branch to just change or ignore compared to an internal protocol.
Exactly. And they pointed to specific, serious gaps in what the protocol actually covered, things it didn't regulate properly.
Like what? What were the key gaps?
They highlighted three major areas. First, the minimum content required in the judicial order itself.
Meaning?
Well, protocol just said a founded judicial order was needed. But DataSoc argued it should specify exactly what technical details and justifications must be included. How can a judge give meaningful oversight if they don't fully understand the scope and nature of the surveillance being requested, or the basic way the software works?
Right. Without that detail, the judge's signature risks becoming just a rubber stamp on a vague request.
That's the concern. The second gap was about data retention and deletion.
How long could they keep the intercepted data?
The protocol didn't say. It failed to regulate the duration of the intercept, or, crucially, mandate the elimination of the collected data once the legal process was finished.
Isn't data deletion usually required by privacy laws?
Yes, Uruguay has a data protection law, Law 18331, and Article 25 specifically requires data to be deleted when it's no longer needed for its original purpose. By not addressing this, the protocol effectively allowed the state to build up potentially vast, permanent archives of highly sensitive citizen data.
Which creates risks for future misuse or breaches. Okay, what was the third gap?
This one is maybe the trickiest. The treatment of data from third parties caught, incidentally.
Ah, the bystanders. If they monitor person A, they inevitably scoop up communications person A has with person B, C, and D.
Exactly. Persons B, C, and D were never the target of the warrant, never suspected of wrongdoing, but their private communications get swept into the surveillance dragnet anyway.
And the protocol didn't say what to do with that incidental data, how to protect those innocent third parties.
Apparently not adequately. No clear rules on segregating it, minimizing its collection, or ensuring its deletion. It's a huge privacy hole inherent in network surveillance that wasn't properly addressed.
So the concerns went way beyond just the misreports for El Guardian.
Oh, yes. DASOC and others pointed out this lack of proper legal footing wasn't unique to El Guardian. Other police surveillance tech, like automated facial recognition systems or something called USINET.
USINET? What's that?
It's reportedly used for intelligence gathering from open sources, like scraping social media. These tools also seem to operate in a gray area without specific, adequate legal regulation passed by Parliament.
It sounds like a pattern of adopting powerful tech first and worrying about the legal framework later, or maybe not worrying enough.
That's certainly the critique, and it ties into a broader issue of transparency. The Ministry of the Interior frequently classified information requested by the public, or even by Parliament itself, using this broad justification of damage to security.
Even for things like protocols or basic operational guidelines.
Apparently so. And critics argued this almost reflexive secrecy wasn't just protecting specific sensitive investigations. It was damaging public trust by hiding the basic rules of the game for systems that affect everyone's rights. Genuine security needs versus just avoiding scrutiny? It's a hard line to draw, but the perception was that the ministry erred heavily on the side of opacity.
Okay, so we've seen the internal breakdown in Uruguay. The oversight failed because the Supreme Court couldn't get the operational data from the Ministry of the Interior to cross-check against the judicial warrants.
And where does that operational data ultimately come from? It comes from the telecommunications operators. They're the ones who actually hold the data and execute the interception orders.
They're the gatekeepers, essentially.
They really are. And this shifts our focus nicely to the global perspective. Using that Telefonica Transparency Report from 2023, it gives us a rare glimpse into how a major global operator handles these government demands across many different countries.
Right, they operate everywhere. What's their stated approach when they get a surveillance request from a government?
Their public stance is grounded in human rights principles, specifically the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. They talk about respecting privacy and freedom of expression.
And practically, how do they translate that into procedure?
They have a strict process. First, requests must come from a competent, legally recognized authority. Second, all requests have to come through a single, dedicated contact point. They call it the ventanilla única, or single window. No unofficial channels.
And do they just comply with every request that comes through that window?
No, they state they review each request rigorously against internal legal criteria. They will reject requests if they lack necessary legal elements like a proper signature, proof of the authority's competence, or if the request is technically impossible for them to fulfill.
Okay, so there's a due diligence process on the operator side. Now, let's talk scale. What did the 2023 data show about the sheer volume of these requests globally?
The numbers are, frankly, staggering, and they vary hugely by country. Take some big markets. Spain saw 175,300 requests for interception or related data in 2023. Germany had over 60,000.
Okay, significant numbers.
But then look at Brazil. Telefonica reported receiving 333,032 requests just for communication interception in Brazil that year, over a third of a million.
333,000 requests in one country, in 1 year. That's immense. Now let's bring Uruguay back into this picture. We know they had the internal oversight crisis. What did the operators' data show for Uruguay?
Well, Uruguay is obviously a much smaller market. They registered 3,810 interception requests in 2023, which affected about 2,119 specific accesses or lines.
Okay, 3,810 requests, still substantial. But here's the interesting part, connecting back to the oversight failure. What was Telefónica's rejection rate for those Uruguayan requests?
This is fascinating. Given the chaos Senator Garcia described, you might expect lots of flawed requests. But Telefónica reported rejecting only 2 interception requests from Uruguay in the whole of 2023.
Only 2 rejected out of nearly 4,000.
Exactly. A minuscule rejection rate. What does that suggest?
It suggests that the warrants themselves, when they actually reached the operator via that sales system, were probably legally sound. The judge's signature was there. The authority was correct.
Precisely. It strongly implies the breakdown wasn't in the generation of the legal warrant by the judiciary. The failure happened after the interception was carried out in the Ministry of the Interior's failure to report back to the judiciary for that crucial cross-check.
The authorization phase worked. The accountability phase failed. That's a critical distinction illuminated by the operator's data.
It really is. Now, let's swing back to Brazil with its mind-boggling 333,000 requests. What about the rejection rate? Brazil is an outlier in both directions. Alongside that enormous volume of requests, Telefónica also reported rejecting an exceptionally high number of them. 70,394 rejected applications in 2023.
70,000 rejections. That's more than the total requests in Germany. Why so many?
It points to significant friction in the system there. It could mean a few things, or maybe a mix. Perhaps the quality of judicial requests submitted by Brazilian authorities is often very poor, missing information, incorrect justifications.
Sure.
Or it could mean Telefónica applies exceptionally strict scrutiny in Brazil, maybe because of past legal challenges or heightened public awareness there. Either way, it shows a huge number of state demands aren't meeting the legal bar set by the operator. A major disconnect.
Interesting. Now, requests aren't just for the content of calls or emails. Governments often want metadata, right?
Oh, absolutely. Metadatas, or associated communications data. This is often even more sought after than content.
Remind us what metadata includes again.
It's everything except the content.
Yeah.
So who owns the phone, subscriber data, the unique ID of the device, MCMA, who called whom, when the call happened, how long it lasted, and, critically, the location of the device when the communication occurred.
Which, even without hearing the call, can paint an incredibly detailed picture of someone's life, their movements, their social network.
Exactly. It's powerful intelligence. And the request volumes reflect that. In 2023, Telefónica reported receiving over 117,000 metadata requests in Argentina. Spain, as we saw, had 175,000 requests covering both interception and metadata. Often, the metadata numbers are higher.
Why higher? Is it legally easier to get?
In many jurisdictions, yes. The legal threshold for accessing metadata is often lower than for accessing the actual content of communications, making it a more common tool for investigators.
Finally, the report mentions more drastic measures. Content blocking and service suspensions. How common are those?
Content blocking seems quite targeted, legally driven. In Spain, for example, nearly 14,000 URLs were blocked. But the report notes this is mostly related to intellectual property infringement, like piracy websites, often based on specific court orders.
So usually commercial or clearly illegal content, not political censorship.
That appears to be the focus in the examples given. Colombia has a system called Wolf Control de Contenidos. specifically for filtering illegal content like child abuse material, using official lists verified by operators.
Okay. And suspending someone's entire service.
That seems very rare and context-specific. Some countries, like Colombia and Peru, have laws allowing authorities to prioritize emergency communications during major crises, which might involve temporary suspension of other services.
Any examples from Uruguay?
Yes, the report mentions 12 instances in Uruguay in 2023, but these were specifically temporary suspensions of access to the 911 emergency number targeted at individuals who were repeatedly making fraudulent or harassing calls to the emergency line. So quite specific and aimed at protecting a critical service. Hashtag outro.
So bringing this all together, this deep dive has really spanned the spectrum, hasn't it? From the very specific, intense crisis around El Guardian in Uruguay.
All the way to the sheer scale of global surveillance demands revealed in those telecom transparency reports. Thousands upon thousands of requests every single day.
And the central lesson, particularly from the Uruguayan case, feels starkly clear. These incredibly powerful surveillance systems, no matter how sophisticated their technology.
They are only as legal and only as safe as the human systems wrapped around them. The protocols, the oversight, the simple bureaucratic task of filing a report.
El Guardian might have been technically designed to be auditable, but that feature meant nothing the moment those mandatory quarterly reports stopped arriving at the Supreme Court.
The entire accountability mechanism just vanished. Not because of a software bug or a clever hacker, but because of administrative failure, a political failure, perhaps.
And the operator reports provide that crucial counterpoint. They show that operators, at least publicly, are often quite rigorous about checking the legality of the initial warrant.
Right. Telefonica rejecting only 2 requests in Uruguay suggests the judges were issuing legally sound orders through sale. The breakdown was internal to the government's follow-through. Post-execution oversight seems to be the weak link.
That fragility, that reliance on human process, even with advanced tech, is really something to chew on.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because when you have a system designed for digital signatures, for audit trails, and the whole thing is rendered opaque simply because someone didn't file the paperwork, it forces a serious reevaluation of relying on technology alone for accountability.
Which leads us to a final thought, a question really for you, our listener, to take away and think about.
If the highest court in the land, the body specifically tasked with being the ultimate check on state power, can't even confirm if a surveillance system is being used legally,
Simply because the legally mandated reports were never filed.
then how much faith can any of us really place in purely technical safeguards? What happens when the failure isn't in the code but in the bureaucracy? Maybe even in a political decision to look the other way.
That's a problem that needs more than just a software update to fix.
It needs robust laws, consistently applied, and unwavering institutional integrity.
Indeed. That brings us to the end of this deep dive into El Guardian, surveillance secrecy, and our digital rights. Thanks for joining us.